It's a great place. I love my apartment.
By that one, so I saw someone put together some clips, like a montage of how many times Joe Rogan said "wow" in the episode.
Fascinating,
wow,
a lot of wow, wow counter,
it's like, wow counter over 25 wows. I thought Wes did a fine job. It's a long form conversation, and it was good. So anyway, the question of textual criticism is an important one. And the transmission of the text of the Bible. And I think that the problem is, and Pastor James, this is one of the things you've been saying for many years, and you've been trying to educate Christians on where do we get our Bibles, how did they come down to us. Most Christians
can we trust them?
Aren't aware of how the Bible has come down to us, how it's been transmitted to us throughout the centuries. When they hear about copyist errors, misspellings, either, quote unquote, missing verses and things like that, they can maybe get thrown by it. And atheists can sort of use that capital of confusion against Christians by saying, well, look, the Isaiah scroll technically was maybe 93, 95% the same.
Exact.
And
right.
And so that's a problem. And I think it just goes to show that as Christians, we need to understand this field a little better. So as preliminary thoughts, Dr. James White, help us to get in the conversation of the transmission of the text of the Bible and why this is so important, especially when someone like Alex brings up differences in the manuscripts.
Right. Probably most of the people in our audience are at least familiar with some of this discussion when it comes to the New Testament, because the vast majority of this conversation is focused on longer ending of Mark. Is the story of the woman taken in adultery, John 7:53 through 8:11, is that original? And there's really not a lot in the Old Testament that is an issue of textual transmission until you start talking about the relationship between the Hebrew text. I have a beautiful Jeffrey Rice bound Hebrew text here.
Post-tenebras.
I'm sorry?
Post-tenebras lux, baby.
That's right. The Hebrew text of the Old Testament, the printed versions of that have very few differences between them, because we're primarily doing what's called the Masoretic text, which came into existence 900,000 years after the time of Christ. And there just aren't that many differences. And
did he say 900,000 years? I think he meant 900 years. Did he say 900,000? What?
The 1525 Blomberg that they used for the King James and our current Biblio-Hebraicus Stuttgartensia only have about 8 major differences between them that actually impact translations. So we're dealing with the same text. The Greek Septuagint, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the Stone Choir guys, Corey Mahler and stuff, they've decided that the Septuagint is the inspired version. The Hebrew's irrelevant. They're modern-day Marcionites. The Gnosticism is back again. The Eastern Orthodox have a very high view of the Septuagint over against the Hebrew as well. So I've been fascinated recently how many self-proclaimed experts have all of a sudden popped up on Twitter with all sorts of issues regarding the relationship of the Hebrew text and so on and so forth. But most of the time, when you're talking textual criticism, you're talking New Testament. So this brought us out of that. And I don't know if you remember back in 2009 when I debated Bart Ehrman, during the Q&A session at the end where people in the audience could ask questions, this guy got up and he brought up the great Isaiah scroll from Qumran, and I knew what was about to happen. I don't think you can see me in the video shot, but I sat back going, oh, I know what's about to happen. He was doing what he thought he should do, and he said, well, what about the great Isaiah scroll? It's, once it was found, we discovered that the text was basically unchanged for 1,000 years. And that is the issue. The main reason to bring up what's called 1Q Isaiah A. So it's the first Qumran cave, Isaiah A. That's the great Isaiah scroll, which you can go online and look at. They've got a great
whole thing in color.
It's in color, and it'll outline the verses for you. I mean, it's really, really, really well done.
Yeah.
You can go online and see all that. But the main reason to bring that up is to demonstrate that there is no necessary reason to believe that just because a document has been transmitted by hand copying for a lengthy period of time, that therefore you should be skeptical that you continue to have the original readings. That's the main reason, because as some people pointed out, in fact, Wes directed me, Sean McDowell had Anthony Ferguson on. Anthony Ferguson is a young scholar, brilliant young guy, who did his PhD. In fact, one of his readers was Emmanuel Tove, who is really the Old Testament textual critical guy in the world right now, has been for many, many years. I actually picked up the 4th edition of his book yesterday in accordance, because mine was like the 1st or 2nd edition.
Hey, Darth, I watched T-Jump talk to James Anderson, and holy smokes, James Anderson spent the whole time trying to explain to him that a statement and a proposition are not the same thing. he could not understand.
Read his stuff decades and decades ago, and he was talking.
It was actually good though, because I didn't. I never really thought about that statement proposition distinction too much before.
About, you brought up the 93%, 96, 99%. When that guy...
Okay, so we're talking about the Isaiah Scroll, Wes Buff's comments on Joe Rogan, and then Alex O'Connor is making a big stink about him claiming it's word for word.
In the debate, brought up the Isaiah Scroll. I knew what Bart Ehrman was going to do. And Barnum has said, well, that's true. The Isaiah Scroll is pretty much unchanged. But have you looked at the Jeremiah?
Mm-hmm.
And Jeremiah in the Dead Sea Scrolls is very different than in the Masoretic text from 1,000 years later.
Mm-hmm.
Now, we know why. If you read Jeremiah, his text was torn up by the king, and there were different versions of it, and he was kicked off to Egypt and all the rest of the stuff. So at the very beginning, you had differences. But I knew he was going to do that. I just saw it coming. Vast majority of seminary graduates know nothing about Old Testament textual criticism. Because you have those notes at the bottom of the page, they know something about the longer ending of Mark or the story of the woman caught in adultery or something like that. But when it comes to the Old Testament, the idea of different proto-Masoretic traditions at the time of Jesus, along with the Targums and along with these other translations that were in existence, and when did the Septuagint come along? And even if people know what the Septuagint is, and people should know what the Septuagint is, I mean, given that 85 to 90%, maybe even more, of the citations of the Old Testament in the New Testament come from the Greek translation of the Old Testament rather than from the Hebrew, that's significant. That's really important. But there wasn't just one Septuagint, and it wasn't translated all at the same time. And so when you've got people running around literally today saying that the Greek Septuagint is the inspired version, they look at this conversation we're having about the great Isaiah scroll like it doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. It's whatever is in the Greek Septuagint. Well, the problem with that is there was no one Greek Septuagint. Pretty much every manuscript we have of the Greek Septuagint from the past was made by Christians, not by Jews. So they don't go back, until 3rd, 4th century after Christ. And the Dead Sea Scrolls take us before Christ. Right. That's extremely important for establishing the text and where it came from and things like that. So when we look at the Isaiah scroll, and this was the issue, and I understand why he said it. What Wes Huff said was it's verbatim.
Word for word, yeah.
Word for word, verbatim. Like what you'd come... Now, when people say...
Okay, Wes didn't technically use the word verbatim. But so Wes Huff uses the word, he says word for word, I think because he's thinking in sort of an academic sense, like it's meaning for meaning, basically. He's not saying it's verbatim word for word. But when a layman hears that, I think they hear verbatim word for word. That's the issue.
Well, why do you...
Oh, this is James White. We're talking about Wes Buff's going on Joe Rogan and saying the Isaiah scroll is word for word the same as the book of Isaiah in the Masoretic text. And then Alex O'Connor's like, no, it's only 95% the same. It's not word for word. And it caused a big ado about nothing, pretty much.
Yeah, if somebody delivered a 2 or 3 paragraph statement and you were to recite it with a 95% accuracy, and what the 5% that didn't correspond bears no bearing on the text, right? Somebody there, or you could say, yeah, it was word for word accurate. You're just generalizing for a lay audience. Okay.
No,
Wes
he was
is fully
actually,
aware.
he explained it, Darth, that he was remembering something in an academic book where the author of the book said it was word for word 95% accurate. So that was the quote.
That's look. Wes is fully aware, given his becoming a New Testament, getting a PhD in New Testament. He's certainly acquainted with the notion of textual variance in the Old Testament. Okay. The point is, he's just speaking in a very general, non-technical way to a lay audience. That if you recite, certain writings to the point where you're reciting it with 95% accuracy, and the 5% that is not technically accurate bears no resemblance to the overall actual content, then most people would just generalize word for word. And nobody's going to he's just speaking colloquially. Just like if I said to you, I spent all day at the motor vehicle department, right? You're not going to think I was there for 24 hours. Welcome, Lord. What would you like to say? Your microphone is muted. Yeah, if you don't unmute your microphone, we're going to drop you.
What was I going to say? He asked to come up. That's weird.
Ben McCain, you don't know what you're talking about. You're speaking out of complete ignorance when you say the Bible has been rewritten so many times. You have no idea what you're talking about. Come on up, and you'll get a little education today. But my guess is you don't have the balls to come up.
Ooh. Hey guys.
Hello.
Do you guys need my age?
Yeah, how old are you?
19.
What would you like to say?
How do I say this? I got a freaking dinosaur, man. Created by Jesus Christ. I mean God, of course.
Welcome, Marva. Do you accept God as your creator?
What a joke! What a joke! Never,
Well,
never. No, I don't live in a
why
fantasy
is it?
world.
I'm going to ask you an honest question. I take it that you're an adult, okay? Why is it that most of you atheists, when you come up on these kinds of streams, you act like complete asses? Why is that?
Because we don't have mummy wiping our butt and our mouth in that order.
Okay, welcome to my block list. Okay.
Welcome to your block list. You are
guess what? He's already
insane.
blocked
Completely
already.
insane.
Oh, guess what? He was blocked already. What a coincidence.
Don't want to block these people, though.
I had him blocked previously
Yeah, I know, but like,
on my account.
yeah, you can block them on your account, but like, I kind of want these weirdos. I like talking to them.
All right, I'll be back.
Welcome, Dragon.
Hello, are you hearing me?
Yeah, I can hear you. What would you like to say?
Hey, what's up, man?
Your mic is kind of.
My mic is low.
It's like muffled. Yeah, I guess.
Oh wait, I'm going to mute myself and then unmute myself. Okay.
Okay.
Are you hearing me better now?
I guess we'll just work with it.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just going to say, you said that Christianity is objectively proven. Can you tell me why is that?
Yeah, because
I'm concerned, we don't have any hard evidence of Christianity other from the Bible?
Right. So I would argue that because like of human limitations, like if if all we had was science and like reason and logic to know the world, it's not enough. We would never know anything, and so I think I would argue that we have to submit to a knowledge outside of the human mind, or else we'll forever be like stuck in like science, where we can never really make sense of our experiences.
That I understand. The thing for me is you're a Christian, right?
Yeah, I'm a Christian.
All right, so the thing for me is because I do believe in a creator, there's no way that something can come from nothing. So I do believe in a creator, but how are you certain that your creator is Jesus Christ? Not only that, how do you know that your creator is a good and all loving creator? Because as far as I can see, if your creator was good and all loving and all powerful, there should be no suffering in the world. Not only that, if your creator is all perfect, how can a perfect being create an imperfect creation? That would make no sense. The mere fact that he
Well,
creates something
this is
that
a
is
straw man
imperfect.
though. This is not the story in the Bible is that God created everything perfect. There was no suffering, and then what happened was humans rebelled against God, and that's why they're suffering. And so God has a plan of redemption where He's going to temporarily allow like bad things, so we learn not to love the world and we turn towards God. And then,
I
because
understand that as well. I don't have a problem with that. But
what are you
there
talking
is
about?
this. I'm sorry?
And like the God you're talking, like we can't know God unless God reveals Himself to us. Like, you can't just say like, oh, logically, there has to be something before the Big Bang, and therefore it's God. Like that doesn't get you anything unless God reveals, steps into creation, human history. We wouldn't know God.
Yeah,
But
that's why I didn't say God. I said the creator because something had to create our universe. Both of us can agree that our universe didn't come from nothing. Both of us can agree on that,
yeah,
right?
but, yeah, but it doesn't matter. It's because you have to prove your position. It doesn't matter if
Yeah, but
really.
I'm saying because both of us already agree that the
Yeah,
universe
but
was created by
yeah, but the
Jesus.
point is, you could never know that unless God revealed that type of knowledge to you. It could
Yeah,
be the
so
case.
how do you know that Jesus is that God?
It could be the case that the universe is eternal, and you would have no idea. Because if we deny what Jesus said, then it would entail like a performative contradiction, or it would lead to absurdity. So without the Bible as our foundation for like a model of reality, there'd be no way to like settle any disagreements to people because there'd be no standards for anything. If you and me disagree, there'd be no standard to tell who's correct.
Wait, what? Why? So you're telling me that you wouldn't consider slavery as something bad and evil if the Bible didn't say slavery was bad and evil?
Slavery's good. No, it's not. So if you're gonna troll, I'm just gonna kick you.
Yeah,
So, yeah,
we're
so like
actually
basically
talking.
like Ted Bundy's evil. We all live our lives like good and evil are real. But only in Christianity do we have God who would actualize the evil, and like a non-God model of reality, evil would just be your fantasy or your imagination or something.
The thing for me with using the Bible as morality, take this for example. If you had
The
two
Bible's
kings
not the morality. God's the morality. The Bible's just
and
the
the
word.
word and the Bible is the word of God, right? So using the word of God Himself, um, that you guys get your morality from the word of God. And the problem with that is, say you have two children, right? And both of them don't steal, both of them do not steal. And then you ask the both of them, why don't they steal? And one was to say to you, oh, Father, I don't steal because I'm afraid of you, your punishment. I'm afraid that you're going to beat me with a belt. And then the other one says, oh, Father, I don't steal because I.
Okay. Josh, do you have anything to say? The guy's just going on and on about nothing.
Yeah, that was a rambling African, but free Diddy.
Oh my god. You're going to hell, Josh.
What's guys? How's it going?
Going well. How are you?
Pretty good. Just chilling, you know. My thing is like, so yeah, Christianity is objectively proven. For the first thing, it's like, how? Like, where's the proof?
Well, the proof is that you wouldn't be able to prove anything without God as a foundation. The Bible as a foundation.
But what about the other books like the Quran and the Torah of the? Let's just talk Abrahamic religions here.
Yeah.
What about those books? I mean, Old Testament is basically the Torah, the foundation of the Torah as well, since they were the same religion at that point. But
then they reject Christ, so they don't believe.
they reject Christ, but you're talking God, not Christ.
What?
You're okay. Are we doing Catholicism like the Trinity?
What's wrong with you? So there's different. The Jewish God and the Muslim God have different properties than the Christian God, and I can show that the Christian properties are essential and necessary. We couldn't.
No. If they're essential and necessary to humans living in a society as social beings, that doesn't make it objectively proven. That just means they took principles that worked and put it into a religion.
If it's necessary, then you can't deny it.
Well, that's not proof that God exists. That's just proof that the principles work for society.
No, I'm not talking about the principles. I'm talking about the claims in the Bible, the claims Jesus said about himself.
Like what?
Like he said, I am the truth, right? So if you don't accept Jesus as the truth, then you don't have any truth.
I mean, but how did he prove he was the truth?
By the attributes he revealed himself, the attributes he revealed about himself. If we examine that attribute set, we see that it's like necessary to as a foundation to understand the world. So
how did people understand the world before Jesus came along?
There was no before. He's eternal.
But Jesus was born 2,025 years ago.
Jesus is eternal. Jesus wasn't born. He was incarnate in a man, but he existed before he was incarnate in a man. He's eternal. He's God.
Okay. So we're going like Catholicism, the Holy Trinity route. Like God, the Son, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit are all one being.
That's what all Christians.
No, Protestants don't believe in the Holy Trinity.
Thanks for coming.
Okay. I mean, I'm just trying to understand like.
Wow. Welcome, Max.
Hi. I just want to preface this. I am a Christian. I'm just curious to know why it's objectively proven.
Yeah, because without unless the mind of God, we accept his revelation, all we would have is the mind of God, man. And if all we have is the mind of man, then we don't have any facts.
I'm sorry. I'm not interested in precept or stuff.
Oh, okay. So anyways, I'm listening to a podcast about textual criticism of the Bible.
Saying just 1,000 years later, because you have two major Masoretic texts somewhere around 1,000 years after Christ. The Aleppo text and the Leningrad text. The Leningrad's probably a little bit younger, but it's full. It's the whole thing. Aleppo's fragmentary in some places. So why say that it's verbatim? It's word for word. That's something that textual critics say. When you have two texts, handwritten texts, that are as close as the Isaiah scroll is, the later Masoretic, we'll say things like, well, they're verbatim. So like if we're looking at Byzantine manuscripts that were produced, 12, 13, 1400 years after the time of Christ in the New Testament, we'll just sort of in passing say, yeah, let's verbatim with this one over there. We're not saying that it's word for word identical like a photocopy, because there were no photocopiers until 1949.
Right.
Okay?
Which is what Bart Ehrman wants.
Right. That's what Bart Ehrman wants. But it's sort of, I think he was just thinking.
Now's the time for a great deal on a new Honda.
It's so clear that the textual tradition that is represented by the Isaiah scroll, which is at least 100 years before Christ, okay, that text is the same textual tradition that became the Masoretic text 900 to 1,000, well, over 1,000 years later. It's the same tradition. Now, as has been pointed out, like by Dr. Ferguson and others, the scroll itself is actually fascinating. And remember, my modern Hebrew text here has vowel pointing in it. And so those vowel points are primarily provided by the Masoretes long after the time of Christ. That's important because that's an interpretational thing. So if you remember, I've debated Anthony Buzzard. In fact, you were there without a beard.
I was there without a beard.
When
in the background.
this young kid.
That's been a while.
It's been a while.
Shut your mouth.
Not too long.
Look, you didn't look over at me a couple Sundays ago.
Yeah?
But you made a comment during a sermon recently where you said something along the lines of, I've been in ministry for so long. And I'm sitting over there going, I'm going, yeah, okay. When it's at least 40 years, you can say so long.
Okay. I'll wait.
Young blood.
I'm just sort of like, yeah, okay, all right. But anyway, you were there, and what's one of his big arguments? One of his big arguments is that in Psalm 110, when it says, we would say Adonai, the Lord said to my Lord. He says, no, it's Adoni. And Adoni is never used of a divine person in the Old Testament.
Okay.
Well, what's the difference between Adonai and Adoni? Masoretic vowel pointing. The Masoretes knew that the Christians used that text, and so they vowel pointed it to take away their argument.
There you go.
And so the Unitarians use it. Well, those vowel points aren't inspired. Well, I've run into Presbyterians who do believe the vowel pointing is inspired. There are no vowel points, of course, in the great Isaiah scroll because they hadn't been developed yet. And so one of the problems with that is, and by the way, this is also relevant to studies in the Quran, because the Quran's a Semitic language, and its earliest manuscripts don't have vowel pointing either. And so you have to have...
There's some issue he's talking about, where like the Hebrew language didn't have vowels. And so when they're trying to add vowels to the Hebrew language, it was difficult because they were copying words, they weren't pronouncing words.
You have to have a way to have vowels. Well, that's all editorial.
Right.
And so in the older forms of the language, they would use what are called vowel letters, which can be function as consonants or as vowels. But you still have to interpret it in context. There's different ways of understanding. And once the Masoretes put vowel pointing in, they're putting their understanding into that text.
It's interpretive.
It's interpretive.
Yeah.
But it's being interpreted long after Judaism has rejected Jesus as Messiah. And so there's places where they, reflect that in their statements. So anyway, back to Isaiah. So it's a consonantal text, doesn't have vowel pointing. And what's interesting is it's pretty much divided right in half. And it seems it may be that someone else copied the second half that didn't copy the first half. I mean, are there different hands involved? That's very common in longer books and things like that. Codex Sinaiticus, we know of at least 4 different scribes that were involved in producing that and things like that. And you can tell that in the second half, there is a purposeful updating of the language to the way the language was being used at that time rather than in the first half of the manuscript, which represented an older form of Hebrew. How you spell things, key and stuff like that, using different letters. So here's the big problem about the Alex O'Connor stuff. What do you count as a variant? What do you even count as a word? Because in Hebrew, you have pronominal suffixes, pronominal go before, you've got suffixes at the end that give you, person and number and things like that, depending on what you're talking about grammatically in the language. And so how do you divide a fairly lengthy word up that may have like a prepositional phrase that's actually been attached to the word? Is that 2 words? In English, we would have for the church would be 3 words, but in ancient languages, that might just be 1 word. So how do you count this? How do you even count how many words there are in the Isaiah scroll? I had Accordance look at it last night, and I think it came up with about 22,800 some odd words. But somebody had to tell Accordance how to count words, and was it using all those? There's no way of knowing. There's no way of knowing. So when someone says, what percentage identical are things
between the Qumran text and then the Masoretic text?
So a thousand years later,
1,000 years difference.
If you're comparing the Leningrad Codex with the Isaiah Codex from Qumran, how do you even make that kind of a decision? Because you can count things in such a way that, let's say that the ancient scribe wants to use a particular form for the word key that is popular at his point in time, that's not going to remain popular, and so it's changed by the time you get to the Leningrad Codex. But it's still the same word, and it still means the same thing.
It's the same word, but it's contextualized.
It's being spelled differently.
Yeah, because of the...
This is the difference between a statement and a proposition. So, a proposition is a truth bearer, and a statement is just like what, like a like an instantiation of the truth bearer or something like that. Yeah. A statement would be a particular truth bearer. So you could have like 2 statements.
Yeah, a statement contains a proposition, but a proposition can be expressed by different statements. Okay, so you could have a statement in English, you could have a statement in French, both expressing the same proposition.
Well, yeah, but in that instance you have 2 statements but 1 proposition. So a statement.
That's correct.
So would a statement be like a particular instantiation of a proposition or something?
It's
a little bit different than that.
It's a semantical expression of the proposition.
Oh, right, a linguistic expression of a proposition.
Yeah, I think that would be better. Yeah, it's a particular linguistic expression of a truth bearer. Okay. So statements contain propositions.
Would a belief in a statement would be different too, right? So belief also contains a proposition, right?
I don't know what you're getting at.
Well, I don't know. This is what James Anderson was trying to get across to T-Jump. T-Jump couldn't understand.
He's ill-informed, uneducated, and he's arrogant. He's blinded by his own hubris. He has an infatuation thinking he's far more intelligent than he is. And as we said, he self-identifies under the A classification.
He kept trying to say that there's just statements and truth makers and there's no propositions. And then Dr. James Anderson's like, yeah, but then there'd be no truth because like he was trying to explain to T-Jump, how you can have 2 statements, but there's 1 proposition. And he said like, a statement is different than a belief, but you could have like a belief, the sky is blue, and then you have a statement, the sky is blue, and they both have the same proposition. So again, it's like...
No, a belief is a positive attitude toward a proposition.
So I don't know. T Jump wanted to say like there were no propositions and there was just like statements and they're true because they correspond to reality.
Look, the guy. I don't. We shouldn't even waste time talking about him because he's just stupid.
It was pretty funny. Like the whole like he's trying to interview James Anderson and it becomes like James Anderson just lecturing him about like basics and philosophy for like an hour, and he kept contradicting himself. Like James Anderson was trying to point out to him how absurd it would be if we say that statements and propositions are like the same thing or something, because he's saying like he made a point about how we know there's like an infinite amount of numbers and those numbers are either true or odd or even, so there's an infinite amount of truths.
No. Who said infinite amount of numbers?
James Anderson.
No. I don't know how you would ground there's an infinite number of numbers. There's a difference between an infinite versus a potential infinite.
Really?
Maybe he's just generalizing.
Well, he said there's an infinite amount of numbers, and then
How would you know that? There's a difference between a potential infinite and an actual infinite.
Okay.
But he may have been referring to a potential infinite and speaking.
No, he said we know there's an infinite amount of numbers. That's what he said.
Yeah, I would love to know how he secures that.
How I don't understand how isn't that just a fact? Like I don't.
Look, how would you know that anything is infinite? You know, the greatest mathematician in the 20th century, according to Craig, was Hilbert.
Well,
Hilbert wrote a paper on infinity, and he says infinities are nowhere to be found. They just serve as an idea in mathematics.
Well, yeah, that's kind of was James Anderson's point. Is that like?
All right, he's just speaking colloquially.
Well, no, because he was trying to make a point about truth. He was saying we know that there's like an infinite amount of numbers, and the numbers are either odd or even, and that's like a truth. So you're saying there's an infinite amount of truths, but there's not an infinite amount of statements. So when you say statements are truths, that doesn't work because there's lots of things that are true that we haven't stated that are true. That's the point he's trying to make.
Yeah, I think if you were to talk with James Anderson, and I would say, but by what means could you know that something is infinite? You couldn't know it by induction.
Couldn't you wouldn't it be logic? Because math would have to do it.
No, listen, do you understand the difference between an actual infinite and a potential infinite?
No.
Okay, that's why you don't understand. Okay, so if I start counting 1, 2, 3, and I keep on counting, I can go on and on and on and on. So suppose I live forever. Will I ever reach infinity? Well, the answer is no. Okay? So there's a difference between an actual infinite and a potential infinite.
Well, you can't reach infinity. There's always one.
No. So you're not going to be able to establish that there's an infinite of anything inductively.
Couldn't you deduce it, though?
From what?
Well, wouldn't there be like an infinite amount of numbers between 1 and 2 because of decimal points?
You're still dealing with a potential infinite. Okay. What would be the difference between decimal notations versus just counting from 1 and keeping going up and you live forever? There wouldn't be any practical difference.
The difference would be you would sort of know the end, I guess. You know the beginning. And the
Well,
end.
you can't know an infinite by induction. Because you don't have an infinite length of experiences. Okay? Why do you think David Hilbert, he wrote a paper called On Infinity? Okay? And he says infinities are nowhere to be found. They just serve as an idea in mathematics.
Well, I make this argument about I use infinity when I talk about like how we need God as a unifying principle because without that there'd be like an infinite amount of properties and objects could have.
Again, you're just talking about a potential infinite. You go onto ChatGPT and have it explain the difference between an actual infinite and a potential infinite.
Okay.
A lot of times people confuse a potential infinite with an actual infinite.
Because the way I think of like the non-God world and to think of like I try to explain how there wouldn't be connections between objects because it'd be like having two dice with infinite sides and rolling them and then they land on the same number because any two objects could have infinite properties.
I got to do something, so I have to drop out. I'll be back probably in about 10 minutes.
No.
Yo, how do you verify external information to be true? What do you mean, Matt? It would just be like what would correspond to like the mind of God.
Is he asking for like a theory of justification, or like what is that question supposed to raise?
It's like totally spazzing. So it says an actual infinite, a set or quantity that is fully complete and infinite all at once. It is not growing or changing, it is just infinite. A set of all natural numbers exists as a whole, even though it is infinite. In mathematics, Greg Cantor treated infinity as an actual set, the smallest level of infinity, potential infinite, a process that never ends but is never complete. It always has potential to get larger, but never realized as an infinite. Oh, an actual infinite versus potential infinite.
A way to get around this is just treat, you know, math and even infinities as like these useful fictions. Like you should be a neutralist when it comes to the reality of those things.
I don't understand.
Like when you say like you're a neutralist about like mathematical objects, right? You're just saying I'm not deciding one way or another whether these things actually like have ontic being, right? You're just using them as like a useful fiction when you talk about like again certain math operations, quantification, stuff like that, you know. It just gets around the whole rigmarole of having to, you know, talk about sets and stuff like that, which is stupid.
I don't understand. I just don't get what Darth is saying at all. Like, and
Like with the potential and actual.
well, James Anderson says, yeah, like we know that there's an infinite amount of numbers, and that every number is either odd or even. So that's like, um, there's a infinite amount of truths that we can't state. Basically, is what he's saying. I don't see.
Oh,
I don't see like how can you not make that argument? I don't get it.
I mean, it kind of sounds like a conjecture to say that, right? Because I think Darth is right when he says you can't like inductively get your way to infinity. Like by definition, it has no end, right? But again, it's like this concept that you can't really probe unless you're like using like an a priori method or whatever. But like saying by definition, infinity has no end, therefore we know infinity has no end, or something like that.
But I could just say like we could just keep counting forever. That's true, right?
Yeah, but you would never, yeah, but you would just never get to infinity. That's why I say like infinity is not something you get to. It's just something you use.
Yeah, but why? But there's never. I don't understand. Like you can
You
always
can't.
you can
So I don't know if you have you read or like even like heard the interviews or like debates surrounding like the paradoxes that you get yourself into when you start talking about like actual infinities.
no.
Yeah. Um, so there's like this paradox about there's like two worlds. I'm gonna chop it up, but you can look it up. There's like this planet and there's a moon, and the moon rotates around this planet twice as fast as like oh, I'm ruining it. Hold on, let me look it up for you. The basic gist is that if you start to apply actual infinities in like reality, you get into these weird paradoxes that you can't like justify. But if you were to say like they're potential infinities, then that kind of like goes away. But
Yeah, I don't know.
where this will hold on, Hilbert's Hotel. I mean, you've heard of Hilbert's Hotel, like the infinite accommodation one.
Why would you, I don't I don't know anything about this stuff. I'm not really interested in math.
Well, like you mentioned one earlier, actually, I'm stupid because you actually mentioned one. You said you heard of Zeno's paradox where you can like divide a length infinitely many times, you know?
Yeah, I think I read that in an Isaac Asimov book, like when I was a kid.
Yeah, and basically the Zeno's paradox is like, well, if I can divide this length infinitely many times, then I should never be able to get to like one point versus I shouldn't be able to transverse or traverse this area, right? But in reality, you can traverse it. So that's why it's like probably not a thing out there in reality. It's probably more of like this weird thing we have, a concept we have in our heads. This guy in the comments keeps saying limit equations, but again, those are just concepts and useful fictions that we use to describe, like, again, more math, right?
Are you like a math nerd?
No, 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 no. Craig has had multiple debates about this and he has books about this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, Dark knows about it too. He just probably wasn't like down to discuss it.
I just don't know anything about it. I can't. You can't talk about it with me because I don't know anything about it.
Hmm. Well, yeah. It's like niche. It's niche rather. So it doesn't really.
When I debate, I shouldn't bring up infinity.
Bring it up, but just don't. When people say like, well, actual infinities are a thing, or like we can prove them by math and stuff, you just don't just say no. Just like that, it's a useful fiction that we talk about these things, you know?
Yeah, I sort of bring it up in like a hypothetical, right? Like to explain something.
Yeah,
What's wrong with doing that's what like James Anderson is doing. It's like hypothetically you could count forever, so there would
yeah,
be um an infinite amount of truth state or things that are true that we can't ever state because you can never like count to infinity. I don't understand.
yeah. Like people will make the argument that like math can describe like certain features of reality, which is probably true with some math. But then they're gonna have a hard time explaining like, well, what does an imaginary number describe? Or like what do like incoherencies in math describe? Like if I say like 1/0, like what does that describe? Like stuff like that. So I don't know. I shy away from using math to argue for God. I mean, I think there's an argument there.
No, I wasn't. But like, I make this argument about how um, we need God to limit the properties of an object because if nothing limits the properties of an object, then it has no limit. And so, like, if nothing has any limits, then it's like it'd be weird to think that any two objects would have the same property because it'd be like rolling two dice with infinite sides and they land on the same number. Because presume
Say that again. I had a call. Say that again.
So presumably any object could have any property. And so without a limit to the properties of an object, there'd be no reason to think that like two objects ever have the same property. And I bring up the examples like hypothetically if you had two dice and each dice had an infinite sides and you roll it and it'd be like landing on the same number. To think that two objects could have the same property without like intention behind that. Because if there's no limit on the object's properties, then it could have any properties. There's nothing limiting the properties. And then I argue that God is the thing that like limits the properties of objects.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, I think being infinite, you could see like being infinite as like this like weird property that a thing has, right? Like we say God has like infinite knowledge, he's omniscient, like that's a property he has, whatever. But whatever you're describing, like again with properties, I don't think there's any like free floating property out there. So there has to be like an object that like reflects this property. So like you said with the infinite, with the die that has like infinite sides, right? Um, we can speak of those things because we can predicate about objects, right? But I don't know how you would even begin to talk about infinity simpliciter like as a concept. You know what I'm saying? Like where's infinity floating out there?
Am I wrong? Yeah, but I'm not arguing about infinity. I'm trying to use it to highlight like what it would. Doesn't that make sense? Like,
No, yeah, I get what you're saying.
so am I wrong to do that?
No, no, I think they're not gonna hear what you're saying. That's all. That's all I'm saying. And rather than get like caught in the weeds, I think Darth has like a good approach where he's like, listen, you can't even like predicate period about objects.
Mm, I don't know. I think we have to go like even dumber and just like maybe make it just about. Huh.
You want to go dumber?
Well, yeah.
Okay.
Like the best thing to do is like keep it simple, stupid. Um,
Yeah.
so would God be the ultimate truth maker? Wait, I'm gonna ask ChatGPT. How does this work? I haven't thought too much about like truth bearers and truth makers. Yeah, God would be the ultimate truth maker.
Mhm.
And so propositions are true ultimately because God makes them true. Would that mean God is the reference for truth? Yeah, he's the referent for truth. Right. So God, right. So we have an ultimate referent for truth, whereas like an atheist would not have an ultimate referent for truth. So that I think that's the like dumbest way you could say like if Jesus isn't the truth, then what is the truth? Because science can't tell us what's the referent for truth,
Mhm.
or philosophers can't tell us what the referent for truth is.
Mhm.
Because that's like a really bare bones like dumb. But maybe it's just like sounds too simple or something. Truth is defined by God's nature, since God is self existent, necessary, unchanging. Truth itself is grounded in Him. What is true reflects God's perfect knowledge of reality. God's thoughts determine reality. If truth is absolute, universal, and unchanging, it cannot be contingent, finite, fallible minds. It cannot be contingent on finite, fallible minds. Instead, truth is what God knows and upholds in creation. So, like, I couldn't know infinity, but God could know infinity, couldn't He?
Yeah, I mean, presumably, if an infinite mind, infinite capacity could know infinitely. Yeah.
So we could sort of like touch upon infinity in sort of an analogical way because our mind is made in the image of God's mind.
Yeah, but as limited like beings, I think we can only kind of have like ideas that we can't fully like apprehend infinity like God does, right?
Well, yeah, but we neither can we comprehend universals like God does or particulars. Like we just sort of can like touch the God. It's like we can sort of like touch the mind of God, but we can't like I don't know. I don't know a good analogy.
I think I know. Yeah, I think I know what you're saying. I like your number four abortionist child sacrifice.
Yeah, I should have done that earlier. I was like nervous to argue about it, but honestly,
Why?
I wanted to look at some debates first, see how they go. I guess.
Well, dude, it's super easy. I
Yeah,
mean, on TikTok, you're gonna get a lot of people arguing from sentience, like that dumb argument, but
yeah, because I mean, really, it's a precept because it's a meta ethical. Like, it's about when do we give human value, right?
Mhm.
They want to say after it comes out vagina, but that's going to be totally like, arbitrary, right?
Yeah, I mean, especially for babies that are born by C-section.
So all you have to do, it's like, yeah, you just point out how it's arbitrary, and then we're all made in the image of God. I looked at the like, there's. Have you ever heard of the abortion abolitionist movement?
Yeah, that's picking up steam, I feel like. They're like everywhere.
Yeah. They say that like pro-life hasn't worked because it doesn't do anything, and I'm like, it seems like they're right. I don't know. What do we have to do? What do we have to do to like I guess petition Congress to change the laws to make it like schmurder is basically what I mean. It just shouldn't be done. Like they always come up with these like is it appeal to extremes? That's actually a fallacy. They're always like, what if your 12-year-old sister got raped by her father? Would you want her to have the baby?
Right.
And then I'm like, well, the father just evolved to do that, so is it wrong?
I mean, you should have like they're gonna pull that out and you should have a ready response because obviously if you don't, you're gonna lose the optics battle there and people are just gonna side with that other person. But
I guess like the optics battle is you start saying about this guy I saw on YouTube. He talks about, well, I think we should unalive the rapist, not the baby. That's what he's
right.
saying. So he brings the focus onto what the whole because like the baby didn't do anything wrong. It's just a consequence of something an evil another person did. So it's like a two wrongs don't make a right type situation.
Mhm. I was um I was talking to one of these TikTok debaters on Tone Loc. I don't know how you feel about Tone Loc,
I
but
don't know him too well.
yeah, but I was talking to one of these like I guess they're like a big person when it comes to the abortion thing, but they were running the sentience thing on me, and uh we came to a point where he said Yeah, Warner, a brain dead patient still has value, yes. I can't take their body and parade them down the street, for instance. I can't mutilate them, for instance, you know.
What about a corpse, right? Like, there's people we know that do sick things to corpses.
Yeah. I
That would
mean, I think that person has dignity regardless if they're alive or not, right? Because they were alive. I mean, that's not, that argument isn't close to us because we're Christian. But they're going to have a hard time on the sentience thing answering that one. I think they're just going to say, like, they were a person, whatever. I'm going to ask them then, why does, like, past sentience, like, convey value, whereas, like, future doesn't? So they have, like, this temporal, they have this temporal sort of continuity problem they haven't addressed.
But that's also like an is ought, right? Just because you have sentience doesn't mean you ought to have like value or something.
Well, they're gonna say like they're just gonna agree, or they're just gonna ask you like, obviously you agree that sentience is important. We value sentience. We try to preserve sentience. So that's where they're gonna argue from you. They're gonna be like, you don't disagree with that, and you're just gonna be like, yeah, I don't disagree with that, and they're just gonna go from there.
I feel like they're just always going to be doing is ought fallacies because like where else are they going to get value aside from God? And like you have to appeal, I think, to the fact that we're made in the image of God, and then say like,
So, so look at what Warner says. This is what I'm talking about. He goes, if there's no experience, there's no harm, but you can be harmed and not experience that harm, right? So the example that's always brought up is like if you have a check that is coming to you for $1 million, and you don't know it, but it's coming to you, and I like intercept that check and I like rip it apart. You've been harmed. Like something's been taken away. You just don't know it yet, right?
true, or
I mean,
like
like health harm is not just physical. Sorry, go.
if a mother who's pregnant like does things that are unhealthy for the baby while she's pregnant, like we know nothing I could talk about them on TikTok, but we would think that was unethical or wrong for her to do that. But the baby doesn't experience it necessarily. But then they'll have like a lifelong problems.
See, that's a good question, King Mars. And when you ask them that, what they're gonna say is, you
Oh, you broke up. Yeah, I think you might have got a phone call. Welcome, AD. Would you like? Oh, go ahead. You back?
Yeah, hello. I hope everyone is doing well. I just wanted to quickly talk about God. Obviously, it's good to believe in God, but unfortunately, you guys believe in a God that never claimed to be God. So then that is an issue.
Yeah, well, that's crazy. The Jesus was crucified because he claimed to be God. That's why they were mad at him. Are you?
Yeah, but in the Bible, I don't think there's a verse where he says, "God, I'm God."
Oh, are you Are you a Muslim?
Yeah.
Yeah, I got banned for talking to Muslims. So that's crazy. They think Jesus never claimed to be God. What? Yeah, that's what happens when you're in a religion that's actually a cult. Is they teach you stuff like that? That's crazy. Jesus claimed he's God, and when he talked to the Sanhedrin, Sanhedrin? Here, I'll ask ChatGPT. Did Jesus claim to be God when he told the Sanhedrin they would see him in the clouds on the right hand of the Father? Did that not reference Daniel 9 that the clouds are associated with? Yeah, so when Jesus told the Sanhedrin that they would see him coming on the clouds of heaven and seated at the right hand of power. In Mark 14:62, Matthew 26:64, Luke 22:69, he was making a clear claim to divinity. Jesus' words directly reference Daniel 7:13 through 14, where the Son of Man comes with the clouds of heaven and is given everlasting dominion, glory, and a kingdom by the Ancient Days, which is God. The Ancient of Days, which is God. In the Old Testament, riding on the clouds is a symbol of divine authority. Psalm 104, verse 3, Isaiah 19:1. Only God is described as coming on the clouds. By applying this imagery to himself, Jesus was claiming the divine role of the Son of Man in Daniel 7, who receives worship and authority over all nations. The high priest tears his robes in Mark 14:63 and accuses Jesus of blasphemy, indicating that they understood that this is a claim to be God. In Jewish theology, no mere human could ride the clouds or sit at God's right hand in divine authority. Jesus' claim was not just messianic. He was placing himself in the realm of God's authority, which was inconceivable for the Jewish leaders unless he was truly divine. So Jesus was claiming to be divine when he referenced Daniel 7, I thought it was Daniel 9, before the Sanhedrin. The imagery of coming on clouds was a direct claim to his divine authority. Maybe I should save this because people always bring this crap up. That's funny. He literally was crucified because he claimed to be God. And they go, Jesus never claimed to be God. No, Jesus was a deicide. Hey, Gazoo. Yeah, doing well. Nice to see you. I guess I was just gonna listen to this podcast, so maybe I'll just listen to it off air. I'll see you guys later.